listen to some technical tips from Nick and I. My name is Nathan Jahnke. I lead our technical team in Ball Seed, and Nick is a technical specialist on the team as well. And he's based in Maryland, so he answers tons of our questions that come into our company from customers, suppliers, and I also do research here in West Chicago. But today we wanted to take some time on a topic that's super relatable, but not necessarily what we're here for right now, right? Because it's summer production. These are all our summer annuals and perennials. And we're going to talk about fall, which should be super timely because these are the plants that are still in your greenhouses right now and you're looking forward to selling in a few months. So little alliteration. We don't want you to trip, but we want you to have success with our fall production. So we'll get started. So there's lots of color options. We're going to pick 5 of these different crops to not go over step-by-step production practices, but a few key points in each one that are going to help you be more successful. So pitfalls to watch out for, or specific techniques that'll help you grow your best crop ever.
Or some of the kind of non-negotiable best practices that you really should not skip that, unfortunately, a lot of growers I talk with do skip sometimes. So hopefully get these on your radar in time before you start to see any of these issues. And we're going to start with everybody's favorite fall color program, mums. How many of you have mums in your greenhouse or out in production fields right now? Yeah, lots of folks there. The number one thing, especially the last couple of weeks, I've gotten a lot of disease-related questions, particularly rootzone pathogens, but really the main ones that you need to look out for in your mums are your rootzone pathogens, Pythium, Phytophthora, chrysanthemi, and Fusarium. Thankfully this year, Fusarium pressure doesn't seem to be as bad, but previous 2 years where we had really brutal high heat with tons of rain, there were a lot more problems all over North America. And then in terms of foliage stuff, botrytis is really kind of the other big one. Just keep an eye on it, particularly as you get closer to visible bud and burst color. Because most of our mums are grown outdoors, so you can't control the weather. And so you have to make sure that you are keeping an eye on the weather and temperature conditions to get your timing for these different fungicide applications on. In general, just wet feet for long periods of time is going to cause root rot issues. Sort of cool to moderate temps tend to be more problems with Pythium, and wet and hot, you'll see more issues with Phytophthora and Fusarium.
One thing to add in that, if you're in a field and you don't have great drainage or you've got some low spots where water is collecting, get those plants up out of that. Put a tray underneath it or something to raise the pot away from the water table that's going to come up, and that'll help keep your pots drier. And those pathogens that may be underneath that field, they're not going to get up into your containers.
Yeah, a big trend for growers with mum production areas outdoors is when they're renovating those spaces, putting down new wheat fabric, things like that, putting a few inches of gravel, really improving drainage in those areas. Can't really do that if you're growing in a kind of floodplain spot out on the back 40, but yeah, definitely anything you can do to keep them out of standing water if you get really bad rains. So in terms of fungicide active ingredients for Pythium, thiazopamid, so this is Segway, and etradiazole. So this includes things like Banrot, Truban, Terrazole. These are still kind of your go-to preventative chemistries. You can get a little bit of curative action if you have some mild disease pressure as well. Methanoxam, so that's the active ingredient in Subdue, can be helpful, but there's a lot of literature out there showing that there's a little bit less efficacy controlling warm season Pythium species like Pythium aphanidermatum. So if Subdue is your go-to fungicide for Pythium prevention and you're seeing a little bit of breakthrough pressure, that's probably why. And that's where it's best to lean on the other 2 chemistries. For Fusarium, this is a very tough pathogen to control with fungicides, even under ideal conditions. But fludioxonil, so it's medallion, trifluomazole, that's the TerraGuard, and difenoconazole, that's one of the active ingredients in Positiva. These are going to be kind of your best bet for preventing Fusarium. And then if you use things like trichoderma, so these are your root shields, your Optigos, your biofungicides, these are really great for early season disease control. But you start to see disease pressure, that's where it's kind of tend to break out the big guns.
One more thing. So you've got 3 different pathogens there, right? And they have requirements for different control strategies. And so you may not always know what you're dealing with if you start to see disease. How many of you have used our diagnostic lab in Helix, sending samples? Anybody? Okay, so we do have a diagnostic lab here in West Chicago. So you can send samples in and we will help figure out what pathogen, if there is one, that's affecting your crop. And so looping in with your tech team, your sales rep or color link, ask about getting a sample in. We'll help shepherd you through that process. And then we can figure out what's the best control strategy.
No, it's for anything that you're growing.
Yeah. They don't do nutrition or soil tests or fertilizer results, right? That's strictly for pathogens that we're looking for. But if it's non-pathogenic, I'm based here in West Chicago. They'll often ping me on Teams. They're like, come down to the lab and have a look at this and see if it's not a pathogen. So, we're going to try and help you out the best we can, whether it's the disease or not.
Yeah. Also, that service is free to you as a fall customer. You can cover shipping to the lab for you. So we just want to get you answers and the best path forward. So mineral nutrition, so fertilizer management. This is kind of one of the biggest pitfalls, again, especially if you're growing outdoors and you have rain that flushes all the fertilizer out of your pot that you just put on that morning. The best approach is to feed early and often. The goal really is shortly after, right at transplant, you want to get a little bit of phosphorus loading and use a more ammoniacal or urea-based nitrogen source in your fertilizer. So things like 20-10-20 are a good one. Some growers use 20-20. I generally suggest if you're going to do that, only do it right at the beginning, only feed with it a couple times, and then switch to something like 20-10-20. But you want to build that strong branching architecture early. Like this mum here is a nice roundy moundy mum. This is, it's got, it's kind of hard to see the picture on the screen. Apologize for that, but it's got really vigorous lateral branch development. That's what you want. The more you can establish that early, the better you're setting yourself up for maintaining that type of architecture through finish and through retail. Then as you're getting a little bit closer to finish, so around visible bud, maybe a little before then, depending on weather in your area, I suggest switching to a more nitrate-based source. So this is, kind of your CalMag type approach. Supplementing a little bit of iron can sometimes help keep stuff nice and green. Cooler temperatures will slow iron uptake a bit. So if you want to boost that up with a little extra iron chelate in your feed, that's a good option. There are 1-bag mum feed fertilizer formulations that you can use pretty much throughout the whole crop cycle. If a 1-bag mix works for you, just keep an eye on overall crop tone as you're getting close to retail. And then my motto is, a wet and well-fed mum is better than a wet and hungry mum. So even if you're getting torrential rain for a week straight, the best thing to do is as soon as you have a break in the rain, try to get back in there, give them a nice little hot shot of fertilizer to keep that nutrition, those mineral nutrient levels high. Incorporating controlled release fertilizer, either mixed into your substrate or top dress, can be a good way to help buffer these uncontrollable weather impacts. So, and then crown budding kind of pairs with nutrition issues. Really, this premature budding response is triggered by cool temperatures, but it's exacerbated and it gets a little bit more severe if mums are low on feed. So there's genetic differences. Some varieties are more sensitive to it than others. But the thing to keep an eye out for is anytime you've got night temps around 65 Fahrenheit or below, that's really the threshold that you need to be keeping an eye out for crown budding and maybe doing some proactive management. The best option really is to just push new vegetative growth with fertilizer up your feed rate and basically flush new non-budded shoots out over the top of your crown buds. But if you are comfortable using Florel, if you're familiar with the PGR and you're not past that sort of first-ish week of July cutoff point for applications, you could use that as well to help pivot them back towards vegetative growth. Don't wait until you see crown buds like this to decide to do something. As soon as you start to see that little strap leaf, that little kind of roundish leaf, that morphology change, that's when you need to be either hitting the gas with fertilizer or making the call to do a Florel application.
So on to our next crops, Echinacea and Rudbeckia, a little bit more different, often used for fall containers. We want to talk about a few things here. So first off is Aster Yellows, which is a disease that really impacts the perennial longevity of Echinacea, but can also affect a lot of different species. If you know anything about botany, the Aster family is huge. There are a lot of different species, so this pathogen can affect a lot of different crops. Anybody know the disease triangle? What are the three things? Anybody? You can't answer. Come on. What do we need to get disease?
A susceptible host, Nathan.
Susceptible host.
Environment.
Conducive environment, the pathogen. Thank you. Yes. So we need those three things in order to get disease. And Aster Yellows is vectored by a leafhopper. So this is an insect that can pierce the plant and suck out sap, per se. And the phytoplasma is this pathogen is in this insect and it will transfer. And so sometimes when you have like botrytis or a different pathogen, it moves and progresses throughout the crop, right? Well, Aster Yellows, you'll sort of see like one here, one there, and another one there, right? Because the leafhopper is hopping, hop, 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 right? Like it doesn't like get every plant in a row. And it causes this distortion primarily in the flower bud itself. So the cone of the cone flower will get more cones and more spikes, and sometimes it'll even grow further from that cone as well. So it's very pleasing aesthetically, and the plant will never recover either. So once you see this in production, you do have to get rid of those plants.
Yeah, trying to sell Echinacea with Aster Yellows as a green Echinacea is a bold choice.
Yeah. let's do the actual varieties that tend toward the green color instead. So there's a few things about leafhoppers. This is primarily an insect that's going to overwinter, come from areas outside your greenhouse. So weed management is very important. If you have agricultural fields around, ditches, that's when those leafhoppers are going to reside and where the pathogen could be present in other species. So keeping track and being observant of your greenhouse's surroundings and timing out applications when these insects are going to be moving into the greenhouse are very important.
Yeah, and just monitoring those sticky cards, making sure that you're, a bunch of them blowing on a storm system, that you're catching them when they first enter your area, your production areas, rather than after they've been there for a month transmitting Aster Yellows around.
And in general, leafhoppers are worse in wet and cool summers. So like this year, we've been a little bit more wet, we've been cool, so we'd expect to see some more Aster Yellows pop up. And you may even actually see it more next year because the plants were infected this year. So we could have some of these, our second year perennials, seeing this pop up in your landscape beds.
Yeah.
So with Rudbeckia, this isn't a huge technical thing, but did you guys know there's lots of different species of Rudbeckia, and we hybridize between those, and there's some big differences here. So we have Hirta and Fulgida, and Fulgida is a little bit more on the perennial side, whereas Hirta is going to be more of our annual Rudbeckia. So hopefully you can see in the pictures here, but that Hirta has a lot bigger flowers, longer petals, and a little bit more color variation, where with the perennial species of Rudbeckia, it's going to form more of a herbaceous shrub of a plant and have lots of smaller flowers all the way around it. So make sure you know which species you're working with. And when you have people walking through the garden center and they're asking, well, is this going to survive next year? That you know which species you're working with and whether it's going to survive or not.
Yeah, look to the breeder culture info for that, for sure.
These are also photoperiodic plants, meaning they respond to the day length. So you often see, like in the perennial beds right now, you'll see Goldstrom and the new one, Gold Blitz from Pan American Seed, and they bloom in long days, right? So if you wanted these plants to bloom earlier, you need to provide longer days. So if you were pushing this for a spring crop for some reason, you need to apply longer days early on in the spring to get these to flower earlier. Another sort of annoying issue that we don't have a great answer for yet, and you'll be like, Nathan, well, you're in research, you should figure it out. I'm working on it. Okay. Echinacea gets this sort of purpling on the leaf. And what we're attributed to often is those plants are staying wet too often. The highlight and their nutrition could be low. So if you're thinking in terms of pansies or petunias early on in the spring when they're cold and wet and underfed, that purpling is sort of similar. So that's where we're going. So avoid low light, make sure those plants are well fed and not staying wet, and you've got appropriate fertility. But so we'll keep working on this and hopefully we'll have an answer for you soon. But right now it's sort of just a feature within Echinacea.
Yeah, general way to sort of get around this is to just really push feed, particularly as you're getting closer to visible bud. It'll, extra fertilizer will help for a little more chlorophyll production, kind of cover up some of those spots. But if you have customers saying, hey, what's wrong with these? What are these purple spots? It's okay. It's just a summertime feature. All right, now let's talk about Celosia. The big thing with Celosia is, particularly early in the crop cycle, minimizing different stressors. Make sure that you're not holding Celosia liners or plugs in trays. The longer they sit there, the more root bound they get, the more issues you're going to have. You can get premature budding. You can get them just kind of sit there for a while and do a whole lot of nothing after transplant. And that could set you back. And that could give you smaller plants at retail. They'll eventually start growing, but best practice to make sure you have all your inputs, your pots and everything ready to go for when your Celosia show up, so they can get transplanted ASAP. They're also a pretty salt-sensitive crop category. You may see a little bit of conflicting culture information out there. Some culture sheets you'll see recommended nitrogen rates, like 250 parts per million nitrogen, something that we would push more for really heavy feeder crops like poinsettias and mums. But if you're using a higher feed rate, make sure that you're maintaining a moderate leaching fraction, so you're not getting fertilizer salt buildup, or give them a periodic clear water leach to help keep from singeing those roots. And then Celosia are pretty sensitive to different stuff phytotoxicity prone. If you are making any herbicide applications on the property for weed management, make sure you're doing it nowhere near your Celosia. Celosia will burn if you look at them funny. So also be mindful of there are some specific fungicide active ingredient sensitivities in different Celosia. They don't necessarily, not every Celosia is going to be sensitive to thiophanate methyl or things like methanoxam, but look to culture information for specific notes on potential chemical sensitivities. Pinch or no pinch? That is the question. Really look to your culture sheets for instruction on whether or not you should be pinching these. So the Intend series is a popular series for fall programs. It needs at least one pinch. I generally suggest doing it in the liner stage. If you're doing direct stick, you should be pinching these about 2 weeks-ish after stick once they're well rooted. But if you're doing like dragon's breath, nice big red plumes, big long dark green leaves, the Cicada says you should not pinch those at all. So make sure you're following those recommendations. Uniformity for any pinch Celosia programs is really critical, especially if you have more than one plant per pot. If you pinch one plant to 7 or 8 leaves below the pitch and one down to 4 or 5, you're going to have a little bit of lopsided plant growth. So take your time when you're doing these pinches. Make sure you're getting good uniformity so that you have nice, happy looking plants at retail. And then flower induction. There's a sliding scale of critical day length. So that's the day length that the Celosia need to initiate flowering. There's kind of a sliding scale of what that critical day length is across varieties that are out there. So again, be mindful of this. Some of them are obligate short day plants. Dragon's Breath is one. Some of them are facultative short day plants. So they'll flower under any day length, but they'll flower more quickly under short days. And then there are some day neutral ones where they'll just flower on the same time frame, really regardless of when you plant them or when you're trying to sell them. So as a result, some varieties may not be well suited to maybe early summer or late summer or early fall programs, depending on your natural day length. So certain series you may need to pull black cloth to get them in color and retail ready in time. So just make sure you have all those benchmark dates. Right, this is when I need to start short days. Have that all figured out ahead of time. Don't fly by the seat of your pants and go, "Hey, showing color yet?" That's never fun. And it's, again, leaning on culture information from the breeders. Make sure you're sort of following their instructions for, hey, you should provide at least 4 to 6 weeks of long days, depending on your natural photo period in your area to get adequate vegetative growth before flower induction. Small plants that get induced a little too early, they're just going to stay small. They're not going to fill out that pot the way you need them to.
Perfect. How many people are growing cabbage, ornamental cabbage and kale? Number of people? Okay, cool. So we're going to jump into that as well. And there's a few challenges here. Next slide. Cool. Okay. So height management. So if you walked into the front area of the gardens right now, there's the circle area, and then you get up to the big landscape where they have a bunch of hibiscus and zinnias, and there's some kale in there too that Landon has put in the landscape design. Actually looks pretty good for having the high temperatures that we have, but you can see it's a lot taller than what we really want for a fall display, right? We want that to be fairly compact and have nice color in the center. And a cabbage and kale will actually start to bolt and get induced to grow taller when there's really high temperatures. So we do face that right sometimes when we have them started in the summer to finish for the fall. So the factors that are involved in this are temperature, what we've talked about, nutrition, as well as your spacing. So if you got plants really close together, of course, they're going to grow taller, right? And then how we control that when we can't control temperature, or maybe we've messed up on our nutrition, are plant growth regulators. And so there's a few options in that. You can use Sue Magic, Bonsai. Some people are also using B9, but they have different uses. So B9 is a very softer PGR, right? Plants can more easily recover from that, and it doesn't last as long in the heat. Sue Magic is a little bit stronger. It can be used throughout production. And then paclobutrazol, Bonsai, that we're going to hold off until later stages of growth. When we've hit the right size, we can apply a drench of that and keep the plant where we want to more effectively with paclobutrazol. And one thing, if you didn't know about transplanting your cabbage and kale liners, you can really plant those as deep as the first true leaves. So that if you got a little bit of a stretched plug, put that a little bit deeper in the soil, and that'll give it some stability, similar to mums, right? If you got a little bit of a stretched liner, plant that a little bit deeper, and it'll give some stability to the plant in the pot later on.
Although mums you can legitimately bury like a foot or two deep.
Yeah, mums will root, cabbage and kale will not. Yeah. But as long as you don't go past that first true leaves, they're not going to rot out on you. Okay, so this is a pretty cool figure, and we'll get these slides posted on the website so you guys have access to it later. But these are all the cabbage and kale, the ornamental ones that Ball Seed sells. and we graphed out the vigor and final height of these different series, because that does impact your rates and the PGRs that you're going to use. And so you have certain varieties like the Nagoya that's going to be tall, where then you have the Osaka IQ, which is a much smaller, more compact variety. So you're not going to want to use the same rates of PGRs on the Osaka as some of these other varieties. So keep that in mind. Critters that munch. We just love caterpillars and worms, right? It's just like the bane of everyone's existence, even in the cabbage that we're growing to eat in the summer. So lots of different species can attack our ornamental cabbage and kales. We've got cabbage worm, cabbage looper, diamondback moths, salt marsh caterpillars, and army worms, just in case you're wondering.
And more.
And more. So how do we control those? There's some proactive control you can do with BT products. So getting those on early will prevent some feeding. And then there's also spinosads, and I'm not going to try and butcher the active ingredient. Yeah, Nick's much better at that. So there's a few other options that you can use that you want to get on proactively before you start to see activity. And then again, similar to Aster Yellows, we need to keep in mind what's around our greenhouses, because a lot of these insects and pests are going to be out around in agricultural fields, in dishes, and they're going to move into the crop, say around harvest time, right? When they're mowing down hay or getting rid of your surrounding area.
Yep.
Also, cabbage and kale have a waxy cuticle or substance on the leaves, right? When you water it, it just sort of rolls right off. And so you may need to add what we call a sticker or spreader into your fungicides or insecticides to make sure it's actually staying on the leaf surface, penetrating the tissue, and systemically moving through the plant.
Yep.
And then one thing here, so pyrethroids like Pylon or Astro, they may not be that effective depending on what's being used in your area around your greenhouse, right? Other agricultural areas or growers are using similar products with similar active ingredients. So there may be some resistance in the insect pressure that you're facing. Last thing on cabbage and kale is color. I mean, we want them to have color, right? We don't just want green cabbage and kale going out into our combos. Again, this is related to temperature, nutrition, and plant growth regulators. Those high temperatures are going to minimize color development. I think specifically we've got over, 70 degrees?
Yeah. And when you're in the upper to mid 70s and your night temps are, above 60, that's where you can get some regreening. So unseasonal weather.
Yeah. When you look at this picture, I mean, this just happened this year, I think, or maybe it was last year to somebody. They got nice coloration. The temperatures went up. And then they had a perfect picture of greenback disorder is what you call it. So you get green, white, then green again. And you're unlikely to get this back to color up again.
Hey, but that's just a new striped variety.
Yeah, some people might find it interesting, but it's not what we're going for. Also, high nitrogen, that's going to minimize color development in cabbage and kale too. So if you're feeding really strong and you're not backing off as we get down in those cooler temperatures just a little bit, you're going to have a more green cabbage and kale than you really want.
Yeah.
But you don't want to completely cut feed, because there's a lot of research out there to show that if you cut feed too early, say down to 50 or even 0 part per million, you're not feeding anymore, you will get a lot of lower leaf yellowing, and all of those are going to fall off right before sale. And there's going to be a stick with a cabbage top on top of it. And that's not what we want.
Yeah. All right. And last but not least, pansies and violas. How many of you have ever dealt with Phalaenopsis, or recently in the last few years reclassified Berkeleomyces? But we're all still going to call it Phalaenopsis for the next 3 generations. So why not? How many of you have ever had Phalaenopsis in your pansies or violas? Nope. Only just a couple folks. Okay. Not a fun situation to deal with, right? This is by far enemy number one in the disease pressure realm for pansies and violas. It is a very virulent pathogen. It has these super, super durable survival spores called chlamydospores. There are our former team leader used to say they're like spores made of titanium. It's very hard to kill them. They just last in the soil for a long time. So when it shows up, a lot of growers often deal with persistent Phalaenopsis pressure for at least the rest of the year, or even sometimes in subsequent seasons too. So it's one that you want to keep out, prevent it from the get-go. The first thing is really start with an immaculately clean growing space. So clean, you could eat your lunch off it.
Not that we're recommending that.
No. So make sure that you're really thoroughly removing any dirt and organic matter from your growing space. Use a powerful cleaning agent or detergent of some kind. Strip it is one that I generally suggest. And then get a quaternary ammonium-based sanitizer. That's generally kind of the best way to start with a clean slate. I know it's hard to, depending on your greenhouse layout, it's hard to minimize movement or foot traffic through the area, but we can track the Labiopsis into our greenhouse, which is on our shoes. If you're gardening the day before at home, or, your kid was, you're at your kid's soccer game or something like that, these spores are just kind of everywhere in the environment. So minimizing foot traffic through that area as much as you can is one way to help. Having little shoe washing stations, even get the little foot baths that, your growers can step into before they're going in and out of those greenhouses, can help reduce potential pressure. And kind of a non-negotiable for pansies and violas is getting preventative fungicides on specifically for the Labiopsis prevention. As much as thiophanate methyl is kind of like one of the oldest fungicides in the arsenal, it's still one of the most effective active ingredients at suppressing disease. Again, this, just like fusarium, is a very tough disease to control with fungicides, even under ideal conditions, but T-methyl is going to be your best bet. So make sure that you have a kind of a regimented application schedule for your pansies from start to finish. Triflumazole, so that's Terragard, and fludeoxonil medallion. Those are kind of the next best options for the Labiopsis.
And there's so many other things we could talk about with the Labiopsis.
Yeah.
Right. This could be a half an hour talk just itself.
Yeah.
But so pH management is also key. Oh, you've got that.
Yeah.
I won't touch that.
Yeah. So piggybacking on that.
You got it.
So pH management, there's a bunch of research that shows you can get lower rates of infection if you're keeping your soil pH below about 5.8. That is not the cure-all, though. You can have a soil pH of 5.5 and still get the Labiopsis in your pansies and violas. So, but this is a way to help mitigate disease pressure. And also, pansies just like lower pH to begin with. So that's going to help make sure you're maintaining maximum nutrient availability. The trick with your feed formulation is pansies and violas respond better to feed formulations with a higher proportion of nitrate-based nitrogen. But a lot of the ones that we use, think about CalMag, they're naturally going to sort of drive the soil pH up over time. So a lot of the pansy feed formulations, these are, like 10%, or there's like 2% ammonium-based nitrogen to, 15 to 18% nitric-based nitrogen. So there are easy solutions to help sort of hit this mark. If you don't want to go that route, just make sure that you're alternating your sort of classically acidic fertilizer formulations, your 20-10-20s or 21-5-20s, with like a 14-0-14 or maybe a plug special 13-2-13, something that's really got a lot more nitrogen, nitrate form nitrogen in it. And then in general, I suggest doing a lower rate constant feed of part per million nitrogen. So in the 125 to, maybe 200 part per million maximum range, you get a little bit less of this jump in growth and petiole stretching and ballooning of leaf size when you're keeping a lower or a more moderate nitrogen rate constantly throughout the crop cycle. And if you're trying to grow your pansies and violas and you get some really hot and wet unseasonal weather, this can start to cause some boron deficiency issues. You ever seen those, the newest leaves kind of unfolding? They're all wrinkly and distorted and kind of weird looking. That'll sometimes lock pansies and violas up for a little bit until you can correct it. So adding a little bit of boron in your feed during those kind of weather conditions, adding a little bit of borax or soluble to your feed, to your stock tank, can be a really easy way to get out in front of that. And then kind of piggybacking on additional fertilizer discussions here, using a lower phosphorus rate at baseline is really going to help control that growth, keep those petioles from getting, half a foot long. We don't want long floppy pansies and violas. So again, a lot of the pansy feed formulations are already formulated with lower percentages of phosphorus compared to other one bag mixes. As much as you can, keep your greenhouse temps cool, minimize that diff. So that's the difference between your daytime and nighttime temperature. Help discourage that stretching response. And then there are different PGR options you can do. I don't suggest Ethifon or Florel for growth suppression. I mean, you should really be using that to just, for early in the crop cycle, resetting flowering, getting everything kind of on the same timeline for color response. But the added benefit of that is you get a little bit stockier, a little more compact plant, and that sort of sets their habit up nicely from early in the cycle. If you're going to do any foliar PGR applications, diminizide and Chlormaphat, so that's your B9s, your ultracells, tank mixes at moderate rates, you can be proactive with it, kind of check growth. It's better to do that early than have tall floppy pansies and violas and really need to slam on the brakes. That rarely results in high quality plants that finish. And if you're going to use paclobutrazol or bonsai, most culture sheets you'll see, they'll say use very low rates at the end. That's just really for just maintaining shelf life and plant quality. as they go to retail. So that's it.
So we're pretty much out of time here, but so if you want to learn more about the tech team, find us. Nick and I will be around both days, today and tomorrow. We can answer any questions. I know Dave got to come up and talk about cut flowers. We've got a great tool for you to access our team and ask questions. Go visit the web track, Tim, for that. And then just wanted to put in a plug for Ball for Fall, which is the next slide, which will be in October here on the grounds. So you can see all the mum variety that Ball Seed offers in addition to a fall crop. So thank you for your time and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.